A millionaire found a little homeless girl sleeping in the church and decided to adopt her. One day, after installing cameras in his house, he was shocked to discover what his wife was doing to the homeless girl. The rain fell mercilessly that night, each drop a needle of ice against Sarah's skin. Her thin jacket, soaked through and heavy, offered no protection against the biting November wind. Through the downpour, the 11-year-old girl stumbled forward, her bare feet numb against the cold concrete. "Please, just for tonight," she begged, her voice barely a whisper as another shelter worker shook his head. The man's face, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent light above the doorway, showed no compassion. "We're full. No room for another mouth to feed," he stated flatly, already closing the door. "Try somewhere else." The door shut with a final thud, leaving Sarah alone in the darkness. This was the third shelter that had turned her away. Her chest burned with each breath, the persistent cough growing worse by the hour. The fever that had started that morning now made the world swim before her eyes. Thunder crashed overhead, and Sarah flinched, pressing herself against a building's wall for support. Through the rain-streaked windows of nearby homes, she could see families together, warm and safe. The sight sent a fresh wave of pain through her heart, sharper than any physical discomfort. "Mom, why did you choose her over me?" she whispered, clutching the worn photograph in her pocket, the last reminder of happier times, before her mother's remarriage, before Emily had turned their home into a prison of cruel words and calculated abuse. Lightning illuminated the street, and Sarah caught sight of a church spire in the distance. With the last of her strength, she pushed herself forward, each step an exercise in pure will. The world tilted dangerously, and she could taste copper in her mouth with each cough. The church steps loomed before her, a mountain to her exhausted body. Sarah managed 3 steps before her legs gave way. She collapsed onto the cold stone, her small frame racked with violent shivers. The rain continued its relentless assault, but she no longer had the strength to seek better shelter. "I don't want to die," she whispered into the darkness, her words lost in the storm. "Someone, please." The fever took hold completely, and the world began to fade. The last thing Sarah saw before consciousness slipped away was the grand wooden door of the church, standing immovable and indifferent to her plight, like every other door that had closed in her face that night. If this story has touched your heart, there's more to come. Join our community of compassionate souls by subscribing. Each subscription fuels our passion to bring you stories that remind us of humanity's capacity for both cruelty and extraordinary love. Sarah Matthews hadn't always known darkness. There was a time, not so long ago, when her world was filled with color and warmth. Before her father David's sudden death in a workplace accident, the Matthews household had been a haven of love and laughter. David, a dedicated high school teacher, had filled their modest home with books and art, nurturing Sarah's creative spirit with bedtime stories and impromptu drawing sessions. Her mother, Claire, had been different then too. She would bake cookies every Sunday, filling the house with the scent of vanilla and chocolate, while Sarah and her father attempted to sneak tastes of raw dough. Those memories now felt like scenes from someone else's life, faded photographs of a happiness that seemed increasingly unreal with each passing day. Everything changed the day they buried David. Sarah remembered clutching her mother's hand at the funeral, watching as Claire's face hardened into a mask that would never fully soften again. The grief consumed her mother, transforming her into a shadow of her former self. The cookies stopped. The bedtime stories ended. The house grew quiet, save for the sound of Claire's muffled crying at night. When Emily Anderson entered their lives 18 months later, Sarah had initially been hopeful. Her mother's new friend seemed to bring Claire back to life, coaxing small smiles and even occasional laughter from her. But after the wedding, Emily's true nature emerged, like a snake shedding its skin. The warmth in her eyes disappeared, replaced by a cold calculation that made Sarah's blood run cold. It started small, forgotten meals, missing school supplies, accidentally damaged artwork. Then came the cruel words whispered when Claire wasn't around. "You're just like your father," Emily would say, her voice dripping with contempt. Weak, useless. A burden, she began controlling Sarah's access to food, claiming it was for her own good. That she was getting too heavy, Sarah watched helplessly as her mother accepted Emily's explanations, too afraid of being alone again to question her new wife's actions. The final straw came when Emily destroyed the last photograph Sarah had of her father. It wasn't an accident. Emily had made sure Sarah was watching as she tore it to pieces, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "It's time to forget the past," she had said, letting the fragments fall into the trash. That night, Sarah had carefully retrieved the pieces, taping them back together by moonlight. The reconstructed photo became her most precious possession, a tangible reminder that love had once existed in her world. What hurt most wasn't Emily's cruelty, it was her mother's silence. Claire, once her fierce protector, now turned a blind eye to the abuse, accepting Emily's explanations with a desperate willingness that broke Sarah's heart. "Emily just wants what's best for you," she would say, avoiding her daughter's eyes. "We have to try harder to make this work." The day Sarah left, she had overheard Emily discussing boarding schools with her mother. "She needs discipline," Emily had said. Somewhere strict, somewhere far away, the thought of being sent away, of losing her last connection to her father and the home they had shared, was unbearable. That night, with nothing but a small backpack containing the taped photograph and a few essential items, Sarah slipped out into the darkness. She had thought anything would be better than staying. But after weeks on the street, as hunger and illness took their toll, Sarah sometimes wondered if she had made the right choice. Yet even in her darkest moments, when the cold seemed to seep into her very bones, she couldn't bring herself to return. The broken pieces of her father's photograph, carefully preserved in a plastic bag, reminded her that she had once been loved. Sometimes that memory was all that kept her going. Life on the streets had taught Sarah lessons no 11-year-old should have to learn. The first week she had been naive, believing someone would surely help a child in need. But doors closed in her face, one after another. Shelter workers asked about parents, made calls to child services, forcing her to run before authorities could arrive. She learned to become invisible, to blend into shadows and slip through crowds unnoticed. The city's underbelly revealed itself to her gradually. She discovered which dumpsters behind restaurants might offer edible leftovers, which shop owners would turn a blind eye to a child huddling in their doorway during storms, and which areas to avoid after dark. She learned to trust no one completely, not even the other homeless people who sometimes shared their food or blankets. Kindness, she discovered, often came with expectations. Libraries became her sanctuary during daytime hours. She would spend hours in the warmth, reading books to escape her reality, using the bathrooms to clean up as best she could. One kind librarian, Mrs. Thompson, pretended not to notice when Sarah dozed off in the corner armchair, but even she would have to ask Sarah to leave at closing time. The worst part wasn't the hunger, though it gnawed at her constantly. It wasn't even the cold, though winter nights made her wonder if she would survive until morning. The worst was the looks, the mixture of pity, disgust, and fear in people's eyes as they hurried past, clutching their bags closer, as if poverty might be contagious. Some days Sarah felt herself becoming less real, as if she were fading away with each person who looked through her, as if she were invisible. Her health had begun deteriorating 2 weeks ago. What started as a simple cold developed into something more serious. The cough that racked her body made sleep nearly impossible, and the fever that now burned through her made every movement an ordeal. She had tried the free clinic once, but without a guardian's signature they could only give her basic pain relievers and advice to get somewhere warm. Tonight's storm had forced her to break her own rules about asking for help. The fever was worse than ever, and something deep in her chest felt wrong. Each breath brought a stabbing pain, and the world had taken on a dreamlike quality that frightened her. She had tried 3 different shelters, each time swallowing her pride to beg for a place to sleep, only to be turned away. The city streets, usually her familiar territory, had become a maze of blurred lights and shadowy threats. Shop windows displayed Christmas decorations now, their cheerful lights a cruel reminder of the family celebrations she would never experience again. Somewhere in the city, she knew her mother and Emily were probably decorating their tree, perhaps not sparing a single thought for the daughter who had disappeared into the night. Despite everything, Sarah still carried hope, a small, stubborn flame that refused to die. She believed that somewhere in this vast city there must be someone who would see her, really see her, and understand that she was more than just another tragic statistic. She held on to this belief even as her body betrayed her, even as the fever climbed higher and her vision grew more uncertain. But tonight, as the rain soaked through her clothes and her legs trembled with exhaustion, that hope flickered dangerously low. She couldn't go on much longer. Something had to change, or she wouldn't survive another week on these merciless streets. Michael Anderson stood at his office window on the 40th floor, watching the storm rage over the city. At 52, he had achieved everything society deemed important: CEO of a successful investment firm, a mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, and a beautiful wife. Yet lately, a growing emptiness had begun to gnaw at him, a sense that something vital was missing from his carefully constructed life. His marriage to Rebecca was picture perfect on the surface. She was everything the wife of a CEO should be: elegant, sophisticated, and skilled at managing their social obligations. They had met at a charity gala 5 years ago, where Rebecca's grace and apparent compassion had drawn him in. Her work with children's charities had particularly impressed him, seeming to fill the void left by their inability to have children of their own. But recently, Michael had begun noticing changes in Rebecca. Small things at first: a sharp word to the household staff, a coldness in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. The warm, empathetic woman he had married seemed to be disappearing, replaced by someone he increasingly struggled to recognize. Their attempts to start a family had ended in multiple disappointments, and with each failed attempt, Rebecca had grown more distant, more controlled. The household staff turned over frequently now. The latest housekeeper, Mary, had lasted longer than most, perhaps because she seemed to know how to make herself invisible when Rebecca's moods turned dark. Michael had tried to discuss these changes with his wife, but Rebecca dismissed his concerns, attributing any issues to the stress of maintaining their social position and her charitable work. What troubled Michael most was the growing realization that Rebecca's charitable work seemed more about appearance than genuine concern for others. He had overheard her on the phone, discussing donation amounts in terms of public relations value rather than actual impact. The warmth she displayed at public events never quite reached her eyes, and she spoke of the children her charities helped with a detachment that made him uncomfortable. Their massive house felt increasingly empty, its perfectly decorated rooms more like a museum than a home. Michael had always dreamed of filling those rooms with children's laughter, of building the family he'd never had growing up in foster care. But Rebecca had grown hostile to the idea of adoption, insisting that their focus should be on natural conception, despite the doctor's warnings about the unlikelihood of success. Tonight, watching the storm, Michael felt the weight of his wealth like a burden. All his success seemed hollow without someone to share it with, someone to carry on his legacy of giving back to the community that had helped him rise from nothing. He had built his firm on the principle of ethical investment, always remembering the helping hands that had guided him out of poverty, but lately even that seemed insufficient. Rebecca's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Michael, the car is waiting. We have the Children's Hospital Board dinner tonight." Her tone was perfectly modulated, her appearance flawless as always. But when he turned to look at her, he caught a glimpse of something in her eyes, a hardness, a void where warmth should be. It disappeared so quickly he might have imagined it, replaced by her usual polished smile. As they rode through the storm-lashed streets in their luxury car, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change. He didn't know how or why, but something in the air, in the wild energy of the storm, spoke of impending transformation. Neither he nor Rebecca could have guessed that their carefully ordered world was about to be upended by a chance encounter with a dying child on a church doorstep. The Children's Hospital board dinner had ended earlier than expected, a blessing Michael silently thanked God for as their driver navigated the flooded streets. Rebecca had fallen asleep in the back seat, her perfect makeup still intact despite the lengthy evening. As they passed the old stone church on 5th Street, something caught Michael's eye, a small, dark shape huddled on the steps. "Stop the car," Michael commanded, his voice cutting through the rhythm of windshield wipers. The driver pulled over, and before Rebecca could fully wake, Michael was already opening his door. The rain hit him like a physical force as he stepped out, his expensive suit immediately soaked through. "Michael, what are you doing?" Rebecca called after him, but he barely heard her. Something about that shape, that stillness, had triggered an instinct he couldn't ignore. As he approached the church steps, his heart stopped. It wasn't a bundle of rags as he'd first thought it was a child. The girl lay motionless, her clothes plastered to her small frame. Her skin, where visible, had a bluish tinge that sent terror through Michael's heart. He reached out, touching her neck with trembling fingers, searching for a pulse. It was there, but weak and thready, her skin burning with fever despite the cold. "Rebecca," he shouted over his shoulder. "Call an ambulance." Without waiting for a response, he shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around the girl's shoulders. As he lifted her, she was terrifyingly light, as if she were made of bird bones and air. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, glazed with fever. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible over the storm. "Don't." Her voice trailed off as consciousness slipped away again. The vulnerability in those two words struck Michael like a physical blow, awakening memories of his own childhood, of nights spent wondering if anyone would ever care if he lived or died. Rebecca had emerged from the car, holding an umbrella, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The hospitals will be asking questions," she said as Michael carried the girl toward their car. "We should call the authorities. Let them handle this." "She'll die before they get here," Michael snapped, his voice harsher than he'd intended. Something about the girl's face, even in unconsciousness, spoke to him of a deep pain he recognized. "We're taking her to St. Luke's, now." The drive to the hospital was tense with unspoken words. The girl lay across the back seat, her head cradled in Michael's lap as he tried to warm her with his body heat. Rebecca sat in the front, her back rigid with disapproval. Every few minutes, Michael would check the girl's pulse, each beat a small victory against the darkness trying to claim her. Under the harsh hospital lights, the girl looked even worse. Her clothes were threadbare, her feet bare and bruised. As nurses rushed to help, Michael caught glimpses of older injuries, healing bruises, scars that spoke of a history he didn't want to imagine. The doctor's face grew grave as he examined her. "Severe pneumonia," he announced. "She's severely malnourished and dehydrated. We need to admit her immediately." He paused, looking at Michael and Rebecca. "Are you her parents?" "No," Rebecca answered quickly, but Michael cut her off. "We found her, but we'll take responsibility for her care." The words came out before he'd fully thought them through, but as he said them, he knew they were right. He couldn't explain it, but something about this child called to him, demanded his protection. The doctor nodded, understanding in his eyes. "She's lucky you found her." Another hour in this weather, he left the sentence unfinished, but its meaning hung heavy in the air. As they wheeled the girl away for treatment, Michael caught one last glimpse of her face. Even unconscious, there was a strength there, a resilience that touched something deep in his soul. Rebecca touched his arm, her fingers like ice. "Michael, we need to think about this rationally. We can't just—" "Yes, we can," he interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "And we will." The look he gave her left no room for argument. Whatever this child's story was, he was now part of it. He couldn't save every lost child in the city, but he could save this one. He had to. In the sterile hospital waiting room, Rebecca paced like a caged animal, her designer heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. The perfect facade she usually maintained was cracking, revealing glimpses of something darker underneath. She watched through the window as Michael spoke with doctors and nurses, filling out paperwork, making arrangements. "This is madness," she muttered when he finally returned. "We don't know anything about this girl. She could be dangerous, diseased, a runaway from a criminal family." Her voice took on a sharp edge. "Think about our reputation, Michael. What will the board members say?" Michael looked at his wife, really looked at her, and for the first time saw something that unsettled him. The concern in her voice wasn't for the child fighting for her life in the next room, but for their social standing, their image. "The board members," he said slowly, "will understand that we're doing what any decent human beings would do. Decent human beings would call child services and let them handle it," Rebecca countered, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her arm. "We're not equipped to deal with a street child. She'll need therapy, medical care, probably has behavioral issues." She trailed off as a nurse approached with forms for Michael to sign. The nurse, an older woman named Helen, gave Rebecca a long look before turning to Michael. "The girl's name is Sarah. She was conscious briefly and told us that much. No last name given." She hesitated. "There are signs of previous abuse. Old fractures, malnutrition. Whatever you decide, she can't go back to wherever she came from." Rebecca's expression hardened further. Previous abuse. All the more reason to let professionals handle this. "Michael, be reasonable. We can make a donation to her care, ensure she gets placed somewhere appropriate, but taking personal responsibility is exactly what we're going to do," Michael interrupted, his voice firm. "At least until she's well enough for us to understand her situation better." He signed the forms with a decisive flourish, ignoring Rebecca's sharp intake of breath. That night, as Sarah slept under medical supervision, Rebecca launched a calculated campaign to change Michael's mind. She spoke of their lifestyle, their commitments, the impossibility of properly caring for a traumatized child. She mentioned their failed attempts at having their own children, suggesting this was Michael's way of compensating for that loss. "I know you mean well," she said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes cold. "But we can't save every stray that crosses our path. Think about what this could do to us, to our marriage. I need you to focus on us, on our future." But Michael saw through the manipulation now. Each argument Rebecca made seemed to reveal more about her own character than about the situation at hand. Her concerns were all about appearance, about control, about maintaining their perfect facade. Not once did she express genuine concern for Sarah's welfare. Later, when Rebecca thought Michael was asleep, he heard her making phone calls. She spoke in hushed tones about expediting paperwork, about finding suitable institutions that could take Sarah. The conversations revealed a network of connections she'd never mentioned before, all focused on maintaining social order and appearances rather than helping those in need. "Yes, I understand the urgency," she whispered into her phone. "We need to handle this discreetly. Michael's having one of his humanitarian moments, but once the girl is stable, we need options for placement. Somewhere. Out of state would be preferable." Michael lay still, his mind racing. The woman he'd married, who he'd believed shared his values and compassion, was systematically plotting to remove a vulnerable child from their lives, not out of concern for the child's welfare, but to maintain their social status. The realization was like ice in his veins. When morning came, Michael made 2 calls of his own. The first was to his lawyer, discussing temporary guardianship options. The second was to his head of security, requesting a complete background check on both Sarah and, more discreetly, on Rebecca. Something about his wife's reaction had awakened suspicions he couldn't ignore. Rebecca watched him throughout the day with calculating eyes, her resistance now wrapped in a veneer of concerned rationality. But Michael had made his decision. Whatever Sarah's story was, whatever challenges lay ahead, he would not abandon her to the system. Not while he had the power to help. When Sarah first regained consciousness in the hospital, the world seemed wrapped in a soft, hazy glow. Gone was the biting cold, replaced by warmth and the gentle hum of machines. For a moment she thought she must have died, that this sterile white room was some kind of afterlife. Then she felt the pain in her chest, the ache in her bones that reminded her she was very much alive. A nurse noticed her stirring and immediately came to check on her. "Welcome back, sweetheart," she said softly, adjusting something in one of the tubes connected to Sarah's arm. "You gave us quite a scare. Do you remember what happened?" Sarah tried to speak, but her throat felt like sandpaper. The nurse helped her sip some water, and gradually, fragments of memory returned: the rain, the church steps, a man's voice in the darkness. She remembered being carried, feeling safe for the first time in months, before everything went black. "The man," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Who?" "Mr. Anderson," the nurse smiled. "He's been here every day, checking on you. He and his wife found you at the church." She paused, watching Sarah's face carefully. "He's very concerned about you." Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back tears. Concerned. When was the last time anyone had been concerned about her? But experience had taught her not to trust too quickly, not to believe in kindness that might vanish like morning mist. "What's going to happen to me?" she asked, dreading the answer. Before the nurse could respond, there was a gentle knock at the door. Michael Anderson stood there, his expensive suit contrasting sharply with the hospital's institutional backdrop. His face lit up when he saw Sarah was awake, and something in his eyes, a genuine warmth she hadn't seen in any adult's eyes for so long, made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. "Hello, Sarah," he said softly, approaching her bed slowly, as if afraid of frightening her. "I'm Michael. How are you feeling?" She studied him carefully, looking for signs of the cruelty she'd learned to expect from adults. But his face showed only genuine concern, his movements careful and non-threatening. "Better," she managed to say. "Thank you for helping me." Michael sat in the chair beside her bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm glad I found you when I did. The doctors say you're going to be okay, but you need time to heal." He hesitated, then continued. "Sarah, I know you might not want to talk about it yet, but I want you to know that you're safe now. No one is going to hurt you here." The words hit her like a physical force. Safe. Such a simple word, but one that had lost all meaning in her world of survival and fear. Tears welled up in her eyes despite her best efforts to hold them back. "I can't go back," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "Please, I can't." "You won't have to," Michael assured her quickly. "I promise you that. Would you be willing to tell me what happened? Who hurt you?" Sarah looked down at her hands, thin and pale against the hospital sheets. The story came out in broken pieces: her father's death, her mother's remarriage, Emily's escalating abuse, the desperate escape to the streets. With each word she expected to see doubt or dismissal in Michael's eyes, but found only understanding and a growing anger that somehow she knew wasn't directed at her. When she finished, Michael was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm, "I want to help you. Really help you, not just until you're better. Would you be willing to consider staying with me and my wife? At least temporarily, until we can figure out the best solution for your future." Sarah's heart seemed to stop. She looked at him in disbelief, searching for any sign of deception. "Why?" she asked, her voice small. "Why would you want to help me?" Michael's eyes grew distant for a moment. "Because many years ago I was a child who needed help too, and someone gave me a chance when I needed it most. Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life, one person willing to take a chance." For the first time in months, Sarah felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. It was small and fragile, like a tiny flame flickering in the wind, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, this was her chance at a new beginning. The decision to adopt Sarah wasn't a single moment, but a series of revelations that struck Michael over the following weeks. Each day he spent at the hospital, watching her recover, revealed new layers to this remarkable child who had entered his life like a storm-blown leaf. One afternoon he found her teaching younger patients how to make paper cranes, her hands gentle as she guided their clumsy fingers through the folds. "My dad taught me," she explained quietly when she noticed him watching. He said cranes bring hope the way she spoke of her father, with love untainted by bitterness despite all she'd endured, touched something deep in Michael's soul. Another day he brought her some books, remembering she mentioned loving to read. Her face lit up at the sight of them, and she immediately dove into the secret garden, her fingers tracing the words as if they were precious gems. "Mary finds a family," she said softly, not looking up. Even though she thought nobody wanted her, hospital staff adored her. Despite her own pain and uncertainty, Sarah had a way of bringing light into the pediatric ward. She would tell stories to frightened children before their procedures, hold hands with lonely elderly patients who wandered in from other floors, and thank every nurse and orderly by name. But there were darker moments too, times when nightmares would wake her screaming, when the trauma she'd endured surfaced like a shark in shallow waters. Michael was there for those moments as well, sitting quietly beside her bed until the terror passed, learning when to speak and when silence was the better comfort. Rebecca's resistance grew stronger with each passing day. The paperwork came back, she announced one evening, her voice tight with barely contained frustration. Her mother is still legally her guardian. We could face kidnapping charges if we pursue this. But Michael had already spoken with his lawyers. "Claire Matthews signed away her parental rights this morning," he replied calmly. "After I showed her the documentation of Emily's abuse and Sarah's condition when we found her. She knows she failed her daughter. This is her chance to do one right thing." The real turning point came during a therapy session Michael had been invited to attend. The therapist, Dr. Jensen, had asked Sarah to draw her idea of safety. Without hesitation, she drew the church steps where Michael had found her. "Why there?" Dr. Jensen asked gently. Sarah's answer, spoken in a small but steady voice, broke Michael's heart and cemented his resolve, because that's where someone finally saw me. Not just looked at me, but really saw me. That's where I stopped being invisible. That evening, Michael sat alone in his study, looking at Sarah's drawing. He thought about his own childhood in the foster system, about the businessman who had eventually taken a chance on him, paid for his education, shown him that family wasn't just about blood. He thought about all the times he and Rebecca had tried to have children, about the nursery that still stood empty in their mansion. His lawyer arrived late that night with the adoption paperwork. "It won't be easy," she warned. "Even with the mother's consent, there will be questions, investigations. Your life will be under a microscope." "Good," Michael replied, already signing his name. "Let them look. I have nothing to hide. That girl deserves a family who will fight for her, and I intend to do exactly that." When he told Sarah his decision, her reaction wasn't the joy he'd expected. Instead, she grew very still, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. "But what about Mrs. Anderson?" she asked carefully. "She doesn't like me." "Rebecca will come around," Michael assured her, though doubt gnawed at him. "And even if she doesn't, this isn't her decision alone. You deserve a home, Sarah, a real home with someone who will protect you, support you, and love you unconditionally." Sarah's next words, barely a whisper, confirmed he was making the right choice. "I've been praying for a dad like you." Michael held her as she cried, her small frame shaking with the release of months of fear and loneliness. He made a silent vow then, not just to adopt her, but to spend the rest of his life ensuring she never felt unwanted or invisible again. That night, as he watched her sleeping peacefully for the first time since they'd found her, Michael knew his life would never be the same. It would be better, harder, more complicated, and infinitely more meaningful than before. He was no longer just Michael Anderson, CEO. He was becoming something far more important, a father. Rebecca Anderson's transformation from polished socialite to seething adversary happened gradually, like poison seeping through clear water. At first, she maintained her public face of supportive wife, attending hospital visits with practiced smiles and appropriate expressions of concern. But in private moments, her mask began to slip, revealing glimpses of the darkness growing beneath. The first major crack appeared when Michael announced his intention to convert their home office into a bedroom for Sarah. Rebecca had been planning to use that space for her charity foundation's headquarters. "That room has the best view of the garden," she argued, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "It's wasted on a child who spent the last month sleeping in doorways." Her resentment manifested in subtle ways initially. She would forget to include Sarah in dinner plans, ordering meals for 2 instead of 3. Hospital visits became shorter, her excuses more elaborate. She began scheduling charity events that required Michael's presence, attempting to reduce his time with Sarah. When these tactics failed to deter him, her methods grew more calculating. One evening, Michael overheard her on the phone with her social circle. "Of course, we're doing this out of Christian charity," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "But between us, I'm concerned about her influence on our reputation. Street children often have connections we might not want associated with the Anderson name." The background check Michael had ordered on Sarah revealed nothing but tragedy: a dead father, an overwhelmed mother, and documented abuse by her stepmother. But Rebecca seized upon every minor detail, spinning possible scenarios of future problems. What if her real mother shows up demanding money? What if she has behavioral issues? What if she's mentally unstable? The final straw came when Sarah was released from the hospital. Rebecca had arranged for a private nurse to care for her in a separate wing of the house, effectively isolating her from the family spaces. "It's for the best," she insisted. "She needs time to adjust to civilized living before we integrate her fully." Michael's fury at this suggestion led to their first major argument in 5 years of marriage. "She's not an animal to be domesticated, Rebecca. She's a child who needs love and support, not quarantine." Rebecca's response chilled him to the bone. "Love," she laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Is that what this is about? Playing daddy to some street urchin because I couldn't give you a child of your own?" The words hung in the air like smoke, revealing an ugliness that had perhaps always been there, hidden beneath her perfect exterior. Michael saw then what he had been refusing to acknowledge: that his wife's charitable work, her apparent compassion, had always been a performance. The real Rebecca was emerging now, threatened by a child's presence in her carefully controlled world. That night, Rebecca slept in the guest room, but not before making a series of hushed phone calls. The security system recorded her conversations with private investigators, with lawyers specializing in adoption disruption, with psychiatrists willing to provide convenient diagnoses for difficult children. "The girl is a threat to our marriage," she told her closest confidante. Not knowing Michael could hear every word, "She's manipulating him, playing on his savior complex. I won't let some little gutter rat destroy everything I've built." The next morning, Rebecca appeared at breakfast immaculately dressed, her mask firmly back in place. She spoke pleasantly about plans for Sarah's room, about shopping for appropriate clothing, about hiring tutors to catch her up on her education. But Michael now saw the coldness behind her smile, heard the subtle emphasis she placed on words like appropriate and proper. As they prepared for Sarah's homecoming, Rebecca's behavior became increasingly erratic. She obsessively reorganized the house, installing new locks on doors, setting up security cameras in every hallway. She claimed it was for Sarah's protection, but Michael recognized the actions of someone establishing control. "She'll need structure," Rebecca insisted, presenting Michael with a rigid schedule of activities that would keep Sarah occupied from dawn to dusk. "Boundaries. Discipline. We can't have her running wild just because she's used to living that way." Each word revealed more of Rebecca's true nature, her need to dominate and control every aspect of their lives. The woman Michael had married, or thought he had married, was disappearing, replaced by someone he barely recognized. Someone who viewed a vulnerable child not as a person to be loved, but as a threat to be managed. Sarah's first week in the Anderson mansion should have been a time of healing and adjustment. Instead, it became a masterclass in subtle cruelty, orchestrated by Rebecca during Michael's increasingly frequent business trips she had carefully arranged through her connections on the board. The first incident seemed innocent enough. Sarah, still weak from her illness, had dozed off in the living room while reading. She awoke to find her books gone, replaced by a note in Rebecca's elegant handwriting: "Proper young ladies don't slouch in public spaces. Confine your reading to your room." It wasn't the message itself that frightened Sarah, but the fact that Rebecca had managed to move around her while she slept, like a predator studying its prey. Food became a weapon in Rebecca's arsenal. When Michael was home, meals were elaborate affairs with multiple courses, but when he traveled, Sarah would find the kitchen locked, with Rebecca claiming she was teaching independence by having Sarah keep to a strict meal schedule. "If you miss dinner time, you'll learn better time management for tomorrow," she would say, her voice sweet but her eyes cold as winter. The psychological games were subtle at first. Rebecca would move Sarah's belongings, then deny doing so, making the girl question her own memory. She would whisper comments just out of Michael's hearing: "He'll tire of you, you know. They always do." Or, "Do you really think someone like him could love someone like you?" Mary, the housekeeper, witnessed these changes with growing concern. She saw how Sarah grew thinner, more withdrawn, jumping at sudden movements. She noticed the girl's drawings, once bright and hopeful, becoming darker, filled with shadows and hidden corners. But Mary's attempts to speak with Michael were thwarted by Rebecca's constant surveillance. One afternoon, Sarah made the mistake of answering the phone when a board member called. Rebecca's reaction was swift and terrifying. She didn't raise her voice or lift a hand that would have left evidence. Instead, she spent an hour explaining in excruciating detail how Sarah's mere presence was disrupting the perfect life she had built, how every mistake the girl made reflected poorly on the Anderson name. "Do you know what happens to ungrateful children?" Rebecca asked, her voice soft as silk. "They end up right back where they came from. Is that what you want, Sarah? To go back to the streets? Because that can be arranged with one phone call." The threat hung in the air like poison gas, seeping into Sarah's nightmares. She began sleeping with her backpack packed, the precious photo of her father tucked safely inside, ready to run if necessary. The streets held their own terrors, but at least there she understood the rules of survival. Rebecca's campaign of terror escalated with calculated precision. She would invite her society friends over, parading Sarah like a curiosity at a circus. "Isn't it remarkable," she would say, "how almost human they can become with proper training?" The women would titter behind their expensive handbags, while Sarah stood frozen, feeling every bit the specimen under glass. The breaking point came during one of Michael's absences. Sarah had been fighting a residual cough from her pneumonia, the sound echoing through the mansion's empty halls at night. She woke one morning to find her medication gone, replaced by herbal tea. "We don't want to create dependencies," Rebecca explained, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Besides, I've read that a little suffering builds character." That night, as Sarah's fever spiked and her breathing grew labored, she heard Rebecca on the phone in the hallway. "Yes, I'm concerned about her mental state. She seems to be fabricating illness for attention. Perhaps we should consider residential treatment." The security cameras recorded it all: Sarah's struggles to breathe, Rebecca's deliberate ignorance of her condition, the calculated cruelty disguised as concern. But Rebecca had already arranged for the footage to be archived properly, or so she thought. She didn't know that Mary had been keeping her own records, quietly documenting each incident, each calculated cruelty, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. Sarah learned to move through the house like a ghost, to make herself as small and quiet as possible. She developed a sixth sense for Rebecca's moods, learning to read the subtle signs that preceded her worst moments. The mansion's grand rooms became a maze of potential traps, each corner holding the possibility of a new humiliation or psychological torture. Yet even in her fear, Sarah maintained a core of resilience. She kept her father's photograph close, whispering to it at night, reminding herself that she had known love once and might know it again. She clung to the memory of Michael's kindness, of his genuine concern for her welfare, even as Rebecca worked tirelessly to undermine it. The weeks following Sarah's arrival at the Anderson mansion marked a descent into calculated cruelty that would have seemed unimaginable in such an elegant setting. Rebecca's tactics evolved from subtle psychological warfare to more overt forms of abuse, each carefully orchestrated to avoid detection while maximizing Sarah's suffering. The basement became Rebecca's favorite instrument of punishment. What had once been a wine cellar was transformed into a place of confinement, its darkness a stark contrast to the mansion's bright, airy spaces above. "You need time to reflect on your behavior," Rebecca would say, her voice carrying a false note of maternal concern as she locked the heavy door. The first time lasted an hour, then 2, then entire nights. Food deprivation became more systematic. Rebecca would serve elaborate meals when Michael was home, forcing Sarah to act grateful for her kindness, but the moment he left, the kitchen would be locked, and Sarah's meals would become sporadic and meager. "Growing children need to learn self-control," Rebecca would explain to the staff, her tone suggesting therapeutic wisdom rather than cruelty. The abuse of Sarah's medication continued with frightening precision. Rebecca would replace prescribed pills with placebos, carefully documenting Sarah's declining mental state when the girl's symptoms worsened. She kept meticulous records of what she called Sarah's manipulative behaviors, building a case for the girl's eventual removal to a psychiatric facility. Physical evidence of abuse was carefully avoided, but the psychological torment intensified. Rebecca would stand in Sarah's doorway at night, watching her sleep, leaving small signs of her presence: a moved book, a slightly opened drawer, just enough to keep the girl in a constant state of anxiety. "Did you sleep well?" she would ask at breakfast, her smile knowing and cruel. The security cameras became both weapon and shield. Rebecca would review the footage daily, using it to track Sarah's movements and behaviors, but she also staged scenes for the cameras, moments of apparent kindness and concern that could be used to counter any accusations. "Look how hard I'm trying," she would say to Michael, showing him carefully selected clips. Sarah's artwork, once a source of joy, became another battleground. Rebecca would analyze each drawing with mock concern, finding hidden meanings that suggested instability or ingratitude. "Notice the dark colors," she would tell Michael. "Dr. Harrison says this indicates deep psychological trauma. Perhaps she's not ready for family life." The girl's possessions began disappearing one by one. Her father's photograph, carefully hidden in her pillowcase, vanished during a routine cleaning. Her favorite books were removed because they were too stimulating. Even her clothes were gradually replaced with Rebecca's approved wardrobe, each item selected to erase Sarah's identity and remake her in Rebecca's image. Most cruel were the moments when Rebecca would suddenly show kindness, creating brief islands of hope before snatching them away. She would spend an afternoon helping Sarah with homework, treating her with gentle consideration, only to turn viciously cold the next day, leaving the girl confused and emotionally whiplashed. "You see," Rebecca would say during these moments of false warmth, "this is how good things could be if you just behaved properly." The implied threat was always clear: any comfort, any kindness was conditional on absolute submission to Rebecca's will. The staff watched this psychological warfare with growing unease. Mary, the housekeeper, began keeping a secret diary of incidents, but fear of losing her job and her ability to witness and document the abuse kept her silent for now. She would leave small acts of kindness for Sarah: an extra blanket during basement punishments, a hidden granola bar during food restrictions, silent gestures of support that helped the girl endure. Sarah learned to survive by becoming two people: the perfect, quiet child Rebecca demanded in public, and the terrified, resilient survivor who endured the private torments. She developed an almost supernatural awareness of Rebecca's moods, learning to read the subtle signs that preceded the worst abuse. But even as she adapted to survive, something in Sarah remained unbroken. In secret moments she would write letters to her father, pouring out her fear and pain on pages she immediately destroyed. She kept a small piece of the original photograph, rescued from the trash, hidden in the hem of her dress. Most importantly, she held on to the memory of Michael's kindness, a lifeline in the darkness Rebecca had created. What Sarah didn't know was that her suffering was being documented from multiple angles. Mary's diary grew thicker, the real security footage was being secretly archived, and even Rebecca's own meticulous records of her therapeutic interventions were building a case not against Sarah, as intended, but against Rebecca herself. Sarah's decision to protect Michael from the truth came from a place of both love and fear. Each time he returned from his business trips, his face lighting up at the sight of her, she would swallow the words that threatened to spill out. The truth, she had learned, was a weapon that could hurt more than just its target. "How are things at home?" Michael would ask, his eyes warm with genuine concern. Sarah would force a smile, speaking instead about her studies, about the books she'd read, carefully editing out the dark spaces between his visits. She became an expert at redirecting conversations, at hiding the tremor in her voice when Rebecca entered the room. The moments alone with Michael became her sanctuary. During their weekend breakfasts, when Rebecca was occupied with social obligations, Sarah could almost believe in the possibility of a normal family life. They would discuss books, share jokes, plan small adventures. These precious hours sustained her through the darker times, giving her something worth protecting. "You're looking thin," he noted one morning, worry creasing his brow. Sarah quickly explained away her weight loss with tales of increased exercise and healthy eating, not mentioning the locked kitchen or missed meals. The lie tasted bitter, but the alternative, watching Rebecca destroy Michael's world, seemed far worse. She developed elaborate systems to hide the evidence of abuse. Concealer borrowed from the housekeeping staff covered the dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights in the basement. Loose clothing disguised her shrinking frame. She learned to time her coughing fits for moments when she was alone, muffling the sound with pillows to avoid drawing attention to her worsening health. The hardest moments came when Michael would praise Rebecca's apparent care of her. "I'm so glad you two are getting along," he would say, missing how Sarah's hands trembled at the words. Rebecca would smile her perfect smile, placing a possessive hand on Sarah's shoulder that to Michael looked maternal but felt like a warning. During family dinners, Sarah performed her role flawlessly. She answered questions politely, ate the food Rebecca prepared when Michael was home, and participated in carefully scripted conversations. Under the table, her nails would dig into her palms, the physical pain helping her maintain composure when Rebecca slipped subtle barbs into seemingly innocent comments. Her school counselor noticed changes in her behavior and attempted to intervene. Sarah deflected these concerns with well-practiced explanations. "I'm just adjusting to my new life," she would say, the lie smooth from repetition. "Mrs. Anderson is helping me learn proper behavior." Each denial felt like a betrayal of herself, but the thought of Michael's devastation kept her silent. At night, in the safety of her room when she wasn't locked in the basement, Sarah would write letters to Michael that she never intended to send. She poured out her fear, her pain, and most of all, her reasons for keeping quiet. "You saved my life," she wrote. "I can't be the reason your happiness is destroyed. I can't let you see what she really is, because it would break your heart." The weight of silence began to take its toll. Sarah's artwork, once vibrant and hopeful, became darker, filled with shadowy figures and locked doors. Her teachers noted her withdrawal from class discussions, her startled reactions to sudden movements. But when questioned, she had ready answers, all designed to protect Michael from the truth. Even in her therapy sessions, mandated by the adoption process, Sarah maintained her silence. She spoke of adjustment difficulties, of learning new rules, carefully crafting her responses to protect both Michael and herself. The therapist, sensing deeper issues, tried to probe further, but Sarah had become adept at emotional sleight of hand. The most painful moments were when Michael would talk about the future, his eyes bright with plans and hopes. "We'll be a real family," he would say, while Sarah nodded and smiled, carrying the knowledge that his dream was already poisoned by a reality she couldn't bring herself to reveal. Her solace came in small acts of rebellion. She kept her diary hidden beneath a loose floorboard, documenting everything in case there came a time when the truth needed to be told. She memorized the layout of every room, marking potential exits and hiding places. Most importantly, she held onto the memory of who she was before the fear and silence began to reshape her. Mary Wilson had worked in wealthy households for over 20 years, but never had she encountered a situation that tested her conscience like this one. From her first day at the Anderson mansion, she had sensed something off about Rebecca's pristine facade, but watching the systematic destruction of a child's spirit was more than she could bear in silence. Her support of Sarah began with small gestures that could be explained away if discovered. An accidentally unlocked kitchen door during Rebecca's enforced fasting periods. Extra blankets left near the basement door, seemingly forgotten during laundry rounds. Small caches of non-perishable food hidden in strategic locations throughout the house, tucked behind books or inside rarely used vases. Mary developed an intricate system of silent communication with Sarah. A particular way of folding towels would indicate when Rebecca was in a dangerous mood. Specific cleaning products left out would signal which areas of the house were under surveillance that day. They never spoke directly about these warnings. Plausible deniability was essential for both their safety. More importantly, Mary became Sarah's secret chronicler. Her diary, disguised as a household expense ledger, documented every incident of abuse with meticulous detail. Dates, times, witnesses, even weather conditions, anything that might eventually help build a case. She kept this record in triplicate, copies hidden both on and off the property, knowing that evidence had a way of disappearing in houses like this. The worst part, Mary wrote in one entry, is watching the light dim in her eyes each day. Mrs. Anderson's methods are so precise, so calculated. Today she made Sarah stand in the corner for hours because her shadow fell incorrectly on the Persian rug. Mr. Anderson needs to know. But timing is everything. One wrong move, and we could lose any chance of helping this child. The security cameras became both obstacle and opportunity. Mary learned their blind spots, the moments when the system cycled through recordings. She used this knowledge to create safe spaces for Sarah, brief moments when the girl could let her guard down without fear of documentation. These respites were precious few, but they helped maintain Sarah's tenuous grip on hope. When Sarah was locked in the basement, Mary would find reasons to work nearby, humming softly, so the girl would know she wasn't completely alone. She developed a series of excuses to check the basement regularly: problems with the wine cellar temperature, concerns about mold, routine maintenance checks. Each visit allowed her to ensure Sarah was safe and slip her small comforts: a flashlight, a granola bar, a note of encouragement. The hardest moments were when Sarah would reach her breaking point, ready to tell Michael everything. Mary would gently discourage these impulses, knowing that without proper evidence, Rebecca would be able to spin any accusation into proof of Sarah's instability. Instead, she taught Sarah subtle ways to maintain her spirit while appearing to submit. "Focus on your breathing," she would whisper during brief moments alone. "Count the seconds until you're safe again. Remember that this isn't forever. We're building a case, gathering proof. Your job right now is to survive." Mary's own position became increasingly precarious. Rebecca, ever vigilant, began to suspect the housekeeper's loyalty was divided. She started setting traps, leaving valuables out to test Mary's honesty, creating situations that would force her to choose sides. Mary navigated these challenges carefully, maintaining her facade of devoted servant while quietly continuing her documentation. The relationship between Mary and Sarah deepened beyond that of protector and protected. During stolen moments in the laundry room or pantry, Mary would share stories of her own childhood, of overcoming adversity, of finding strength in unexpected places. These weren't just stories, they were survival lessons wrapped in narrative. Most crucial was Mary's role as witness. In a household where reality was constantly questioned and manipulated, she provided Sarah with confirmation that her experiences were real, that her feelings were valid, that her suffering was not imagined. This validation became a lifeline, helping Sarah maintain her grip on sanity despite Rebecca's gaslighting. One night, finding Sarah especially desperate, Mary took her greatest risk yet. She shared her personal phone number, written in invisible ink on the inside of a cleaning supplies label. "Use this only in absolute emergency," she whispered. "I'm keeping records, building evidence. We'll find a way to make this right, but we have to be smart about it." What neither Sarah nor Rebecca knew was that Mary had begun sharing carefully selected information with Michael's personal assistant, Thomas, building a network of allies who could act when the time was right. She understood that bringing down someone like Rebecca required more than just accusations. It needed irrefutable proof and perfect timing. The breaking point came on a stormy night, eerily similar to the one when Sarah was first found. Michael was away at a conference Rebecca had orchestrated, and the mounting pressure of maintaining her perfect facade had finally cracked her carefully constructed veneer. The security cameras would later reveal the calculated nature of what followed, each moment captured in cold, digital clarity. Rebecca had been drinking, not enough to blur her precision, but just enough to loosen the bonds on her cruelty. She found Sarah in the library, reading one of Michael's books about business ethics. The sight of the girl, so clearly trying to connect with Michael's world, triggered something dark and final in Rebecca's mind. "You think you can replace me?" she asked, her voice carrying that deadly calm that Sarah had learned to fear. "You think you can turn my own husband against me with your pathetic attempts to be his perfect daughter?" The glass of wine in her hand caught the lightning flashing outside, casting red shadows on the wall. Sarah tried to make herself smaller, to disappear into the leather armchair, but Rebecca was beyond being appeased by submission. "Get up," she commanded. "It's time you learned your final lesson about where you really belong." What followed was a methodical dismantling of every comfort Sarah had been allowed. Rebecca started in the girls' room, systematically destroying each possession while forcing Sarah to watch. The few photographs she had, her drawings, the books Michael had given her, all torn to pieces or thrown into the fireplace. "Please," Sarah whispered when Rebecca reached for the last hidden fragment of her father's photograph. "Not that. Please, Mrs. Anderson." "I'll do anything." The plea only seemed to fuel Rebecca's rage. "Mrs. Anderson," she mocked, ripping the precious photo into confetti. "So formal. So proper. Is that what you call me when you're poisoning Michael's mind against me? When you're playing your little victim games?" The basement door stood open like a waiting mouth. But this time, Rebecca had prepared something special. The space had been stripped of even the meager comforts Mary had managed to hide there. The single bulb cast harsh shadows on bare, concrete walls, and the temperature had been deliberately lowered through manipulation of the wine cellar's cooling system. "You want to know what it's like to be truly alone?" Rebecca's voice had taken on an almost dreamy quality. No more sneaking food, no more secret allies, no more playing the perfect daughter. She pushed Sarah inside with surprising strength. 3 days should do it. By the time Michael returns, you'll either have learned your place or... The threat hung unfinished as the door slammed shut. Sarah heard multiple locks engaging, followed by the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor above. Rebecca was barricading the door. The darkness was absolute, the cold immediate and biting. Hours passed, marked only by the increasing pain in Sarah's chest as her pneumonia, never fully healed, began to reassert itself in the damp cold. She tried to maintain her orientation by touching the walls, counting steps, doing anything to keep her mind from splintering in the darkness. Above, Rebecca orchestrated her cover story with precision. She called Michael, voice trembling with manufactured concern, to report that Sarah had run away after a minor disagreement. She contacted the police, playing the role of worried mother perfectly, even as she ensured their search would focus on areas far from the house. The security cameras captured it all, Rebecca making these calls while sipping wine, occasionally walking past the basement door with a satisfied smile. She even took time to rearrange Sarah's room, making it appear as though the girl had packed a bag and left voluntarily. But Rebecca's perfectly orchestrated plan had one flaw. In her focused rage, she had forgotten about Mary's day off, had forgotten that the housekeeper often returned in the evenings to check on things when Rebecca was known to be drinking. She didn't know that Mary had her own key to the service entrance, or that the security system's blind spots had been carefully mapped out over months of observation. In the basement, Sarah's cough grew worse. The cold seemed to have weight, pressing against her skin, seeping into her bones. Her breath came in ragged gasps that echoed off the concrete walls. The darkness was so complete that she began to see things, shadows moving in shadows, memories playing like broken films against her closed eyelids. "Dad," she whispered into the void, "I don't think I can make it this time." The admission cost her what little warmth she had left, and she curled tighter into herself, trying to preserve what remained of her strength. Far above, she could hear Rebecca's heels clicking across the floor, each step a reminder of her complete powerlessness. Michael's early return from the conference was pure chance, a cancelled meeting that opened a window in his schedule. He hadn't called ahead, hoping to surprise Sarah with the astronomy book she'd been wanting. The house was unusually quiet when he entered, the silence holding an unfamiliar weight. Rebecca's performance was flawless at first. She rushed to greet him, her face perfectly arranged in an expression of distress. "Michael, thank God you're home," she began, tears welling up on cue. "Sarah's run away. I've been beside myself with worry. The police are searching, but..." Something in her voice, a note of artificial concern, made Michael pause. Years of business negotiations had taught him to read subtle signs of deception, and suddenly he was seeing them everywhere in his wife's behavior. When he asked, keeping his voice steady. "This afternoon," Rebecca replied smoothly. "We had a small disagreement about her homework, and she stopped as Michael walked past her to his study, where he accessed the security system's main console." "Michael? What are you doing?" The cameras had been recording everything. Michael had installed them secretly 2 weeks ago, after noticing bruises on Sarah's arms that couldn't be explained by normal childhood accidents. What he saw now, playing out on multiple screens, made his blood run cold. He watched in horror as the day's events unfolded: Rebecca's methodical destruction of Sarah's belongings, the cruel psychological torture, and finally the basement imprisonment. His hands began to shake as he rewound further, seeing weeks of systematic abuse compressed into minutes of footage. "You're watching the wrong thing," Rebecca said quickly, reaching for the controls. The cameras caught her leaving through the garden gate. "If we check that footage..." Michael caught her wrist before she could touch the console. "Stop lying," Rebecca. His voice was deadly quiet. "Where is she?" Rebecca's mask cracked for just a moment, showing something dark and vicious beneath. "You don't understand. That girl was destroying everything we built. She was turning you against me, manipulating you with her pathetic victim act. I had to." "Where is she?" The roar of his voice echoed through the house, making Rebecca step back involuntarily. A sound caught his attention, faint but distinct. A cough coming from below. Michael sprinted toward the basement door, finding it blocked by a heavy sideboard. As he began to shove it aside, Rebecca made one last attempt to maintain control. "She's fine," she insisted, her voice taking on a clinical tone. "This is a necessary intervention." Dr. Harrison agreed that she needed firm boundaries. Dr. Harrison doesn't exist, came a new voice. Mary stood in the doorway, holding a thick notebook. I've documented everything, Mr. Anderson. Every fake phone call, every manufactured medical consultation, every incident of abuse. It's all here. Working together, Michael and Mary cleared the barricade while Rebecca watched, her facade crumbling completely. When the door finally opened, the blast of cold air carried the sound of labored breathing from the darkness below. Michael found Sarah huddled in the corner, her skin like ice, her breathing shallow and ragged. The beam from his phone's flashlight revealed the full horror of her conditioned lips, tinged blue, body racked with violent shivers, eyes glazed with fever. "Daddy," she whispered, the word barely audible. It was the first time she had called him that. He wrapped her in his suit jacket, cradling her like she might shatter. "I've got you, sweetheart. I've got you now." Looking up at Mary, he barked, "Call an ambulance. Now." Rebecca stood at the top of the stairs, something like madness dancing in her eyes, you see. Even now she's manipulating you. Those tears, that weakness, it's all an act. I was trying to help you see. "Be quiet," Michael cut her off, his voice trembling with rage. "If you say one more word, I won't be responsible for my actions to Mary," he added. "Call the police too. Tell them everything." As they waited for help to arrive, Michael held Sarah close, murmuring promises of safety and love, trying to warm her frozen body with his own. She drifted in and out of consciousness, each breath a battle, but her hand gripped his shirt with surprising strength. "I'm sorry," she whispered during a moment of clarity. "I tried to be good. I tried not to cause trouble." "No, sweetheart," Michael's voice broke. "I'm the one who's sorry. I should have seen it sooner. But it's over now. She'll never hurt you again." The ambulance ride became a blur of urgent voices and flashing lights. Sarah's condition deteriorated rapidly, her body finally surrendering to the combined effects of prolonged abuse, untreated pneumonia, and extreme cold exposure. The paramedics worked frantically, their professional calm belied by the speed of their movements. BP dropping, temperature at 94.31, called out. Severe respiratory distress. Possible sepsis. They attached monitors, inserted IVs, wrapped her in warming blankets, but Sarah's vital signs continued to decline. Her small hand, still clutching Michael's, felt like ice. Michael watched helplessly as Sarah struggled for each breath. The oxygen mask fogged erratically, each gasp more labored than the last. The paramedics' words blended into a terrifying litany of medical terms: hypothermia, respiratory failure, cardiac concerns. Through it all, Sarah's eyes remained fixed on his face, as if afraid he might disappear if she looked away. At the hospital, they tried to separate them for treatment. Sarah's panic at losing sight of Michael sent her heart rate skyrocketing, forcing the medical team to relent. They worked around him as he held her hand, speaking softly about the future he promised they would share. "Just stay with me, sweetheart," he pleaded as her eyes began to drift shut. "Think about all the books we'll read together. The places we'll go. Remember how you wanted to see the ocean? I'll take you there, Sarah. Just hold on." The doctor's face was grave when he pulled Michael aside. "Mr. Anderson, your daughter's condition is extremely critical. The pneumonia has advanced significantly, and the hypothermia has weakened her immune system. We're seeing signs of organ stress. We need to place her in intensive care immediately." Outside the ICU, police officers waited to take Michael's statement. The security footage had been secured, Mary's documentation collected. Rebecca was already in custody, her carefully constructed world crumbling as quickly as her public facade. But Michael could barely focus on their questions. His entire world had narrowed to the rhythmic beeping of Sarah's heart monitor. Hours passed in a sterile waiting room. Each update from the medical team seemed worse than the last. Sarah's fever spiked dangerously high as her body fought multiple infections. Her lungs, already weakened from her previous bout with pneumonia, struggled to provide enough oxygen. The doctors spoke in careful terms about preparing for all possibilities. Mary arrived with a change of clothes for Michael and news from home. Rebecca was being held without bail. Her history of calculated abuse shocking even veteran detectives. The security footage had revealed the full scope of her methodical cruelty. But none of this seemed to matter as Sarah's condition continued to worsen. During one of the brief periods when he was allowed to see her, Sarah managed to open her eyes. The various tubes and monitors made her look impossibly small and fragile. "Don't leave," she whispered through the oxygen mask, her voice barely audible. "Never again," Michael promised, his voice thick with tears. "I'm right here, baby. Daddy's right here." The word daddy felt natural now, a truth he'd always known but just discovered. He couldn't lose her, not when they'd only just found each other. The night brought a critical turn. Sarah's temperature soared, her body convulsing with fever. The medical team rushed in as alarms blared, their urgent commands echoing off sterile walls. Michael found himself pushed aside, washing through a window as they fought to stabilize her. "Her body's shutting down," he heard someone say. "We need to act." Now they wheeled in more equipment, called for specialists, worked with desperate efficiency. Michael pressed his hand against the glass, feeling more helpless than he had even during the worst moments of his own childhood in foster care. As dawn approached, the head doctor emerged looking exhausted. "We've managed to stabilize her for now, but the next 24 hours will be crucial. She's fighting hard, Mr. Anderson, but she's been through severe trauma. Her body is extremely weak." Michael sank into a chair, his own strength finally giving out. The weight of everything Sarah's suffering, his blindness to it, Rebecca's betrayal crashed over him like a wave. He had all the money in the world, but right now it seemed worthless. What good was wealth if it couldn't protect the one person who mattered most? The monitors told the story in steady beeps and flickering lines, each sound marking the precarious thread between life and death. Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate despite the medical team's best efforts. Her fever remained dangerously high, her oxygen levels critically low, and her small body showed signs of giving up the fight. "Her system is overwhelmed," the specialist explained to Michael, his voice gentle but direct. "The combination of prolonged abuse, malnutrition, and the recent trauma has compromised her immune system severely. We're doing everything we can, but you need to be prepared." Michael refused to hear the rest. He spent every allowed moment by Sarah's bedside, talking to her through the maze of tubes and wires. He read from the astronomy book he'd brought home, described the places they would visit together, promised her a future filled with love and safety. But Sarah remained unresponsive, lost in a fevered twilight between consciousness and oblivion. The crisis came at 3 a.m., that hollow hour when hope seems furthest away. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor suddenly changed, becoming erratic before erupting into a shrill alarm. Medical staff flooded the room, their urgent voices cutting through the night's quiet. "She's crashing. Get the crash cart." BP dropping rapidly. Beginning chest compressions. Michael watched in horror as they fought to restart Sarah's heart. Each compression on her tiny chest seemed both brutal and desperately necessary. Time stretched like taffy, seconds becoming hours as he silently begged dead deity, listening to spare his daughter's life. Through the chaos, he caught glimpses of Sarah's face. She looked peaceful, almost as if she was sleeping, the pain and fear of recent months erased. For one terrible moment, Michael wondered if letting her go would be kinder than asking her to continue fighting. The thought had barely formed when Sarah's body arched with the force of the defibrillator. Once, twice. The room held its breath, waiting for a response. The monitor's flat line seemed to mock their efforts, its monotone hum a death knell for all their hopes. "Time of death," the doctor began, but was interrupted by the faintest of beeps. Then another. Sarah's heart had started beating again, but the victory felt hollow. She remained deeply unconscious, her body pushed beyond its limits. If she survives the night, the doctor warned, There's a significant risk of brain damage from oxygen deprivation. She may never fully recover. The words fell like stones in the quiet room. Michael sank into the chair beside her bed, taking her small hand in his. It felt different, now lighter somehow, as if Sarah were already beginning to fade away. He pressed her fingers to his lips, remembering how strong those same hands had been just days ago, turning pages in a book, drawing pictures of the future she hoped for. "Please," he whispered, not sure who he was begging. "Please don't take her. She's never had a chance at real happiness. She's never known what it's like to feel completely safe, completely loved. Give her that chance." The night stretched endlessly, marked by the rhythmic beeping of machines and the quiet movements of nurses checking vitals. Michael didn't move from his vigil, his eyes fixed on Sarah's face, watching for any sign of change. He barely noticed when Mary arrived with fresh clothes and coffee, or when the police came for an update. Dawn found them in the same position, Sarah fighting for every breath, while Michael fought against exhaustion and despair. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hospital room, highlighting how pale and small she looked in the large bed. Each breath seemed more difficult than the last, as if her body was slowly forgetting how to perform this most basic function. "Hold on, sweetheart," Michael pleaded, his voice hoarse from hours of talking. "Just hold on a little longer. I'll give up everything, the company, the house, every penny I have. Just please, stay with me." The specialist arrived with news of an experimental treatment, a last resort option that offered a glimmer of hope. The procedure was cutting edge, available only at a private clinic in Switzerland, with a success rate that barely justified its astronomical cost. The price tag would consume everything Michael had built over his lifetime. But the treatment needs to begin immediately, the specialist explained, laying out complex medical terms and statistics. "But I must be clear, insurance won't cover experimental procedures. The cost, including emergency medical transport and the treatment itself, would be..." Michael didn't even let him finish the sentence. "Do it," he said, already pulling out his phone. "Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. Just save her." His fingers moved swiftly across the screen, initiating transfers and liquidating assets he'd spent decades accumulating. His financial advisor was horrified. "Mr. Anderson, this will bankrupt you completely. The company, the investments, your retirement funds, everything will be gone. At least let us explore other options or negotiate the price." "There's no time for negotiations," Michael snapped, watching Sarah's oxygen levels drop again on the monitor. "Sell it all. The house, the cars, my stock options, everything. Just make it happen now." The next hours became a blur of paperwork and urgent calls. Michael signed away his life's work without hesitation, liquidating assets at a fraction of their worth for immediate cash. His signature flowed across documents that dismantled his financial empire piece by piece. By piece. The board of directors called an emergency meeting, trying to stop what they saw as their CEO's emotional self-destruction. "Think rationally," they urged. "You're throwing away everything you've built. There must be other treatments, other options." Michael's response was simple: "Everything I've built means nothing if I can't save her." He resigned his position on the spot, transferring his controlling shares to generate the needed funds. Decades of careful investment and strategic planning undone in a matter of hours. Mary watched from the doorway as Michael made call after call, his voice growing hoarser but his determination never wavering. She brought him coffee and sandwiches that went untouched, and quietly gathered Sarah's things for the upcoming transfer. The medical transport team arrived as the last transfers were being completed. They worked efficiently, preparing Sarah for the journey that represented their last hope. Michael had nothing left now except the clothes on his back and a father's desperate love for his daughter. His lawyer arrived with final paperwork just before the transport was ready to leave. "The house has been sold," he reported. "The company shares liquidated. Everything's been transferred to cover the treatment and associated costs. But Michael, you're left with nothing." Michael looked at Sarah's pale face, watching her struggle for each breath. "You're wrong," he said softly. "As long as she survives, I have everything that matters." He signed the last documents without reading them, his entire focus on the medical team's preparations. As they prepared to move Sarah to the waiting air ambulance, one of the board members made a final attempt to reason with him. "This is madness, Michael. You're throwing away your entire life's work on a gamble. The chances of success are minimal. Think about your future." "She is my future," Michael interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "Everything else is just money and property. Those can be rebuilt. She can't be replaced." He turned away from his former colleague, focusing entirely on helping the medical team secure Sarah for transport. The hospital staff who had witnessed Michael's sacrifice watched in silence as father and daughter were loaded into the waiting helicopter. Many had seen wealthy patients before, had observed the complex negotiations between money and medical care. But few had seen someone give up everything so completely, so unhesitatingly for love. While Michael focused entirely on saving Sarah's life, Rebecca orchestrated her escape with the same meticulous precision she had once used to torture her stepdaughter. Using her remaining influence and hidden financial resources, she managed to manipulate her way out of police custody during a hospital transfer, her actions calculated down to the last detail. The news of her escape reached Michael just as they were preparing to board the air ambulance. "She's gone," the detective reported grimly. "We believe she's trying to access offshore accounts before leaving the country. We have alerts at all airports and border crossings." Michael barely registered the information, his attention fixed on the medical team securing Sarah for transport. But Mary, standing nearby, noticed something the others had missed: a familiar car in the hospital parking lot, visible from the helipad. Rebecca hadn't fled at all. She was watching, waiting for one final opportunity to destroy what remained of their lives. The attack came with stunning swiftness. Rebecca emerged from hiding just as they were transferring Sarah to the helicopter, armed with both a gun and a thick file of manufactured evidence. "You think you can just throw me away?" she screamed over the sound of the rotors. "After everything I've done to maintain our perfect life." Hospital security responded immediately, but Rebecca had positioned herself carefully. "One step closer and I'll shoot," she warned, her designer outfit incongruous with the wild desperation in her eyes. "Michael, you're going to listen to what I have to say, or I'll make sure neither of you leaves here alive." The medical team froze, trying to shield Sarah's unconscious form while maintaining the crucial life support equipment. Michael stood between Rebecca and the helicopter, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "It's over, Rebecca. Let it be over." Over, she laughed, a high, brittle sound. "I have proof here, documents showing how that little brat manipulated you, medical records proving her instability. Once I release these to the media, your precious new family will be destroyed. Your reputation will be ruined. Is that what you want?" What Rebecca hadn't noticed in her focused rage was Mary quietly circling behind her, using the skills learned from years of becoming invisible in wealthy households. The housekeeper's movement was silent, determined, fueled by months of witnessing abuse she had been powerless to stop. "You want to know what manipulation looks like?" Rebecca Mary called out, causing Rebecca to spin around. In that moment of distraction, hospital security moved in. The gun clattered to the ground as Rebecca was tackled, her carefully crafted plans falling apart as quickly as her composed facade. "No," she shrieked as they handcuffed her. "You don't understand. I did it all for us, Michael. That girl was destroying everything perfect about our life. I had to stop her. I had to." The file she had been holding spilled across the helipad, revealing her final deception. The papers were blank, empty threats from an empty woman who had lost everything that mattered. As the police led her away, her expensive heels stumbling on the concrete, she was already spinning new lies, new manipulations. But no one was listening anymore. The medical team quickly resumed their work, loading Sarah into the waiting helicopter. Michael spared his wife one last glance, not of anger or hatred, but of pity for someone who had never understood that true perfection lies in love's imperfection. Mary watched the helicopter lift off, carrying father and daughter toward their last hope for survival. Below, Rebecca's screams faded into the distance as police cars pulled away. The housekeeper clutched her documentation tightly, no longer needed for Sarah's protection, but crucial for ensuring Rebecca would never hurt another child again. In the sterile quiet of the Swiss hospital's waiting room, as Sarah fought for her life in intensive care, Michael received a call that would reshape his understanding of everything that had happened. The detective investigating Rebecca's case had made a startling discovery while processing the contents of her hidden safe. "Mr. Anderson," the detective's voice crackled over the international line, "we found documentation about Sarah's background, so you might want to sit down for this." There was a pause, filled with the weight of revelation. "Sarah Matthews is the daughter of James Matthews. Does that name mean anything to you?" Michael's world tilted on its axis. James Matthews, his best friend from college, the man who had given him his first job, who had died saving Michael's life in a warehouse fire 15 years ago. The memory of that night came rushing back, James pushing him out of the collapsing building, the final smile on his friend's face as the ceiling came down. That's impossible," Michael whispered, but even as he spoke, the pieces began falling into place. Sarah's familiar mannerisms, the way she bit her lip when concentrating just like James had done. Her love of astronomy, the same passion that had driven James to build his own telescope. Even her resilience in the face of cruelty reflected her father's unbreakable spirit. The detective continued. "Rebecca knew. She found out during the background check she ran when you first brought Sarah home. There's a letter here, written by James before he died, asking you to take care of his family if anything happened to him. Rebecca intercepted it years ago." The revelation struck Michael like a physical blow. All this time, he had been fulfilling a promise he never knew he'd made. James's final request had found its way to completion despite Rebecca's attempts to prevent it. Through the ICU window, Michael watched Sarah's chest rise and fall with each assisted breath. She was fighting with the same determination James had shown in everything he did. The connection was so clear now, how had he not seen it before? "There's more," the detective added softly. "Rebecca's diary suggests she discovered this connection shortly after you found Sarah. It seems to have fueled her abuse. She saw Sarah as a threat, not just to your relationship, but to the narrative she had built about your past. She was afraid Sarah would help you remember James, and with him, the person you used to be before she remade you." Michael remembered how Rebecca had systematically separated him from his old friends after their marriage, how she had discouraged any mention of his past. Even his memories of James had been carefully packed away, too painful to examine closely. She had used his grief to reshape him into the person she wanted him to be. Now, watching Sarah fight for her life, Michael felt the full weight of his responsibility, not just as her adoptive father, but as the guardian his best friend had chosen for her. "I'm so sorry, James," he whispered, pressing his hand against the glass. "I should have been there for her sooner. But I promise you I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." The doctor approached with an update on Sarah's condition, and Michael forced himself to focus on the present. The past, with all its revelations and regrets, would have to wait. Right now, his daughter, James's daughter, needed him. And this time he wouldn't fail either of them. The second revelation came through Rebecca's psychiatric evaluation following her arrest. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect socialite had crumbled under professional scrutiny, revealing a history of trauma that explained, but didn't excuse, her cruelty toward Sarah. Dr. Elizabeth Carter's report painted a devastating picture. Rebecca had grown up in a prestigious family where appearance meant everything and imperfection was brutally punished. But her own mother had subjected her to similar psychological torture she later inflicted on Sarah: locked rooms, food deprivation, calculated humiliation. The cycle of abuse had come full circle. The patient's inability to bear children appears to have been caused by severe malnutrition during her teenage years, the report stated. Her mother's obsession with maintaining the perfect daughter led to eating disorders and lasting physical damage. This trauma seems to have manifested in her treatment of Sarah, whom she saw as having the childhood freedom she was denied. The most shocking discovery was a series of diary entries from Rebecca's adolescence, found in a safety deposit box. They revealed a young girl's desperate attempts to earn her mother's love through self-destruction. "Maybe if I'm perfect enough," one entry read, "she'll finally see me. Maybe if I disappear completely, she'll notice I was here." Police interviews with Rebecca's former household staff revealed a pattern of behavior that predated Sarah. Other children relatives, visitors, even the children of staff members had experienced similar treatment, though never to the same extreme. Each incident had been carefully covered up with money and threats. She would practice on them, a former maid testified, testing different methods of control, seeing what worked best. But with Sarah, it was different. It was personal. It was like she was trying to break something in that child that she recognized in herself. The investigation uncovered years of therapy records, all carefully hidden from Michael. Rebecca had sought help multiple times, but always abandoned treatment when therapists began addressing the root causes of her behavior. She preferred the illusion of perfection to the messy work of healing. Most revealing was a letter Rebecca had written but never sent to her own mother, found in her private study. "You taught me that love is conditional, that perfection is the only acceptable state of being. Now I see your face in every mirror, hear your voice in every cruel word I speak. I become you, and I don't know how to stop." The psychiatric team concluded that Rebecca's obsession with controlling Sarah stemmed from a desperate attempt to rewrite her own history. By breaking Sarah's spirit, she was symbolically breaking her younger self, proving that her mother's methods were right all along. Michael received this information with a complex mixture of emotions. The knowledge didn't lessen his anger at what Sarah had endured, but it added layers of tragedy to an already devastating situation. Rebecca had been both victim and perpetrator, trapped in a cycle of abuse she couldn't or wouldn't break. Understanding doesn't mean forgiveness, Dr. Carter noted in her final assessment, but it might help everyone involved begin to heal. The real tragedy is that Rebecca chose to continue the cycle rather than end it. She had opportunities to break free, but the allure of control was too powerful. The third revelation came in a way that defied rational explanation during the critical hours of Sarah's experimental treatment. Mary, who had flown to Switzerland to support Michael, experienced what she could only describe as a visitation in the hospital's small chapel. Exhausted from worry and travel, Mary had dozed off during her prayers. In that space between waking and sleeping, she found herself in conversation with a young woman whose features seemed oddly familiar. The woman wore a simple white dress and had Sarah's eyes, but carried herself with a grace that spoke of years Mary knew she hadn't lived. "You're seeing what could be," the figure explained, her voice carrying echoes of both youth and wisdom. "I'm Sarah, but I'm also every child who needs protection. The future isn't set yet, but your part in this story is more important than you know." The vision shifted, showing Mary glimpses of possible future Sarah growing into a strong, compassionate woman, using her experience to help other children escape abuse. She saw a foundation being built, a safe haven for those who needed protection, all stemming from the actions taken in these crucial moments. "But why me?" Mary asked in the dream. "I'm just a housekeeper." The figure smiled, and in that smile Mary saw generations of guardians who had watched over children in need. "You were never just anything. Your role was to witness, to document, to protect. Without you, the truth might never have come to light." The vision continued, revealing how Mary's careful documentation had done more than just build a case against Rebecca. It had created a template for identifying and stopping abuse in wealthy households, where power and privilege often concealed cruelty behind perfect facades. As the dream began to fade, the figure touched Mary's hand. The touch felt remarkably real, warm and solid in a way dreams usually weren't. "Keep watching over her," the voice said. "She'll need your strength for what's to come. And remember, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness save lives." Mary awoke with tears on her face and a profound sense of purpose. The chapel's early morning light seemed to hold echoes of the dream's clarity. She couldn't explain the experience rationally, but its impact was undeniable. When she returned to Sarah's room, she found Michael holding his daughter's hand, speaking softly about their future plans. Mary noticed something she hadn't seen before: how Sarah's features in repose echoed those of the young woman from her dream. The possibility of that future suddenly felt very real and very achievable. The dream's message stayed with Mary, influencing her actions in the days that followed. She began organizing her documentation into a format that could help others identify signs of abuse in privileged households. Her experiences and observations, once simply evidence, became a tool for prevention. More importantly, the vision gave her hope during the darkest hours of Sarah's treatment. When the medical team looked concerned or Michael's strength seemed to waver, Mary held onto the image of that possible future. She knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that Sarah would survive to fulfill the potential she had glimpsed. The experimental treatment proved successful, though Sarah's recovery was gradual and often painful. Each small victory, the first unassisted breath, the first clear word, the first weak smile, felt like a miracle to those who had witnessed her closest brush with death. The Swiss hospital room slowly transformed as Sarah regained her strength. The walls, once sterile white, became covered with her drawings, not the dark, haunting images from her time with Rebecca, but bright scenes of hope and possibility. She drew the ocean she'd never seen, the family she was building, the future she could finally believe in. Michael never left her side during those crucial weeks, sleeping in a chair beside her bed, his own recovery happening alongside hers. Having lost his wealth but gained what truly mattered, he found himself rediscovering the person he'd been before success, and Rebecca's influence had reshaped him. He spent hours telling Sarah stories about her father, watching her eyes light up with recognition at shared traits and habits. "Did he really build his own telescope?" she asked one evening, her voice stronger now but still holding traces of wonder. When Michael nodded, she added, "I've always felt closest to him when looking at the stars. Now I know why." Physical therapy was challenging, but Sarah approached it with the same determination that had helped her survive Rebecca's abuse. She would often push herself too hard, frustrated by the weakness in her once resilient body. During these moments, Michael would remind her that healing, like love, couldn't be rushed. "Small steps. Sweetheart," he would say, supporting her as she struggled to walk again. "We have all the time in the world now." The most significant breakthrough came during a session with Dr. Weber, the child psychologist who had been working with Sarah throughout her recovery. For the first time, Sarah spoke about her experiences without dissociating, without trying to protect anyone else's feelings. "I thought I deserved it," she admitted, her fingers tracing patterns on the blanket. "I thought if I could just be perfect enough, she would stop hurting me. But now I understand it was never about me. It was about her own pain, her own darkness." This understanding, while not erasing the trauma, helped Sarah begin to truly heal. She started keeping a journal, filling it not with records of abuse, but with dreams for the future. Each page represented another step away from survival mode and toward truly living. The hospital staff, who had witnessed many recoveries, found themselves moved by the transformation they observed. It wasn't just Sarah's physical healing that impressed them, but the way her spirit emerged from its protective shell, bright and unbroken despite everything it had endured. "Some patients recover," her primary nurse commented to Michael, "but Sarah, she's blooming. It's like watching someone step into sunlight after a very long darkness." Most touching were the moments when Sarah would comfort other young patients in the pediatric ward, sharing her own story of survival and hope. Her natural empathy, once used to navigate dangerous waters, now became a gift she could share freely. Everyone deserves to feel safe, she told a frightened child before their surgery. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is believe that things will get better. As Sarah's strength returned, so did her laughter, real laughter, not the careful, measured responses she had learned to give. The sound of it echoing through the hospital corridors became a symbol of healing for everyone who heard it. After Sarah's release from the Swiss hospital, Michael found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood near the sea. It was nothing like the mansion they'd left behind, just 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a balcony barely big enough for 2 chairs. But when Sarah first saw the ocean from their window, her face lit up with a joy that made the space feel like a palace. Starting over wasn't easy. Michael took a job teaching business ethics at a local community college, finding unexpected fulfillment in sharing the lessons he'd learned about the true meaning of wealth. Sarah returned to school, initially struggling with the transition but gradually finding her place among peers who knew nothing of her past. Their evening routine became sacred. They would sit on the balcony, watching the sunset over the water, and share one good thing that had happened that day. Some days, Sarah's good thing was as simple as making it through class without a panic attack. Other days, she bubbled over with stories about new friends or academic achievements. "Do you miss it?" Sarah asked one evening, meaning their old life of luxury. Michael looked at her healthy, happy, safe, and answered truthfully, "Not for a second." They built new traditions together. Sunday mornings were for astronomy using a second-hand telescope Michael had found at a yard sale. Sarah discovered she had inherited her father's talent for finding constellations, and their balcony became an observatory of sorts. Money was tight, but they found richness in unexpected places. They learned to cook together, turning budget meals into adventures. Sarah proved to have a natural talent for baking, and their apartment often filled with the scent of experimental cookie recipes. The therapy continued, but now they attended sessions together, learning to heal as a family. They dealt with nightmares, panic attacks, and moments of overwhelming grief for all they had lost, but they faced these challenges together, their bond growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. Their apartment slowly filled with evidence of their new life, Sarah's artwork on the walls, books from Michael's classes stacked on every surface, seashells collected from weekend beach walks. Each item told a story of healing, of choosing joy over fear. Michael found work consulting for small, ethical businesses, his experience helping others build companies with conscience rather than just profit. Sarah often accompanied him to meetings, absorbing everything, already showing signs of wanting to follow in both her father's footsteps. They kept in touch with Mary, who had become family in all but name. She visited regularly, bringing her famous casseroles and updates about the foundation she was establishing to help identify and prevent abuse in wealthy households. The neighborhood embraced them. Their elderly next-door neighbor taught Sarah to garden on the tiny balcony. The local librarian kept special books aside for her. The coffee shop owner knew their orders by heart. It wasn't the high society they'd left behind, but it was real, warm, and genuine. Most importantly, they learned to laugh again, real, unguarded laughter that came from true joy rather than social obligation. They made silly jokes, had impromptu dance parties in their small living room, and found humor in their occasional mishaps at adjusting to a simpler life. "We're rich in all the ways that matter," Michael often said, and Sarah would smile, understanding now what true wealth meant. 5 years later, on Sarah's 16th birthday, they held a small celebration on their balcony. The gathering included Mary, some school friends, and the neighbors who had become extended family. As the sun set over the ocean, Sarah stood to make an announcement that would bring their journey full circle. "Dad and I are starting a foundation," she said, her voice strong and clear. "We're calling it the James Matthews Memorial Foundation for Child Protection. We'll be working with Mary's organization to help identify and prevent abuse in privileged households and to provide support for children who need a fresh start." The seed money had come from an unexpected source, the sale of Rebecca's personal assets after her conviction. The courts had awarded the proceeds to Sarah as restitution, and she had immediately known how she wanted to use them. It felt right, somehow, to transform the resources that had once enabled abuse into a force for protection and healing. Michael watched his daughter speak with pride, noting how she carried herself with the same quiet strength that had characterized her biological father. The scared, broken child from the church steps had grown into a powerful advocate for others, her own experiences fueling her determination to make a difference. The Foundation's first project was already underway, a series of training programs for household staff, teaching them to recognize signs of abuse and providing resources for reporting it safely. Mary's documentation had become a crucial part of the curriculum, helping others learn from what she had witnessed. Sarah's artwork now sold in local galleries, her pieces telling stories of survival and hope. She had developed a unique style that combined darkness and light, helping viewers understand both the depth of trauma and the possibility of healing. The proceeds went directly to supporting other survivors. The apartment had remained their home, though they could now afford something larger. Some things aren't about money, Sarah would say when asked why they stayed. This is where we learn to be a real family. These walls have seen us heal. Rebecca's story had its own ending. In prison, she finally began the therapy she had long avoided, confronting her own traumatic past. She wrote Sarah a letter of apology, not asking for forgiveness, but acknowledging the depth of harm she had caused. Sarah kept the letter as a reminder that healing was possible, even for those who had caused pain. As the birthday celebration wound down, Sarah and Michael took their usual places on the balcony. The telescope, now a much better model than their yard sale find, was pointed at the stars. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights reflect off the water. "Dad," Sarah said finally, "do you think both my fathers would be proud of who I've become?" Michael looked at his daughter, strong, compassionate, unbroken despite everything she had endured, and felt the presence of his old friend in the moment. "More than you could ever know, sweetheart. More than you could ever know." Their story, which had begun in darkness and despair, had transformed into one of hope and redemption. It served as a testament to the power of love over wealth, of healing over hatred, of the family we choose over the circumstances we're born into. The Foundation's motto, chosen by Sarah herself, summed up everything they had learned in the darkest night: be the light you needed to find your way home. It was a promise to all the children still waiting to be saved, a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength lies in reaching back to help others across the same bridges we once had to cross alone. If this story of love, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between father and daughter has touched your heart, we invite you to become part of our storytelling family. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What moment moved you most? Subscribe to our channel to join a community that believes in the power of hope and healing. Every like, share, and subscription helps us continue bringing these meaningful stories to life. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that even in our darkest moments, love can light the way home. Together, let's spread messages of hope and resilience.